Free speech is alive and well on today's News Talk, The Pulse. Critically analyzing global affairs, The Muckrakers.
For facts and truth.
Today's News Talk, The Pulse.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. And as always, here on the Muckrakers, we pledge to continue tackling the most pressing and controversial news issues of our time. Our mission is to provide more light and less heat in our unwavering quest to uncover the truth and to inform, educate, and entertain, all with dignity and respect. And as I always say, it's vital we don't just ask the questions, but question those answers. Well, today it's a moving feast. We're going to be looking at Gaza, we're going to be looking at Ukraine and the situation generally in the Middle East. And we've assembled another brilliant panel. Delighted to be joined by Ambassador Peter Ford, Dr. George Szamuely and Dmitry Orlov. Let me just fill you in on a bit of their background. Dr. George Szamuely is a Senior Research Fellow at the Global Policy Institute, London. He's written for innumerable publications and is author of Bombs for Peace, NATO's Humanitarian War on Yugoslavia. We all have several copies of that. If you haven't yet bought it, go and do that now. Peter Ford is from a working class family in the northwest of England. We try to put that on the map. And opportunities created by Harold Wilson's government enabled him to have a successful career in the Foreign Office, serving as British ambassador to Bahrain in 1999 to 2003, and then Syria 2003 to 2006 before retirement. He's a lifelong socialist and former member of the Labour Party. And finally, Dmitry Orlov is a Russian-American engineer, linguist and writer. He's a truly independent mind and a more and more popular guest of print and internet publications. He's written extensively about the collapse in general and specifically comparing the demise of the USSR to the US crisis. He's analysed topics as diverse as the Russian mafia and the Pashtun ethical code, which enabled them to become the graveyard of empires. His book, The 5 Stages of Collapse, is an astonishing firework of ideas, many of them suggesting the readers should get collapse proof because catastrophic demise is the inevitable destiny of empires and states. The bigger and more structured, the more catastrophic their collapse. Gentlemen, welcome to the Muckrakers.
Good to be with you, Andrew.
It's great to have you. And Dmitry, it's your first time on the Muckrakers. I know you've been a regular with other guests here. And I always say it's always helpful to unpack how we got here, a little bit of the history. So let's start with Ukraine and the conflict. Dmitry, give me your take on the history of it.
Ukraine is not a country. The term Ukraine means borderland in Polish. There are lots of regions of Russia that are called Krai, which is basically the same word except in Russian. It just means the edge or the borderland. Ukraine was never a country until the Soviet Socialist Republic was formed, which was called Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, for lack of a better name. There's no such people as Ukrainians. That is a concoction. The country accidentally became a sovereign nation during the collapse of the USSR. It never had any traditions of self-governance, and as a result of that, it completely squandered over the next 30 years its entire endowment of Soviet-era wealth, which was very substantial. It was the most highly industrialized area of the USSR. Now, the reason that it is in its current borders is the fault of Lenin and Stalin. Lenin lumped in various lands that were part of the Russian Empire that the Russians conquered from the Turks, mostly, early on, that were settled centuries ago by Russians and various other nationalities, Ukrainians not among them. And then after World War II, Stalin lumped in areas that were properly parts of Austria-Hungary, then Poland, Romania, and Hungary itself. And these lands are still inhabited to a large extent by Poles and Romanians and etc., and should go back to where they came from eventually when this chimeric entity is finally dissolved. That's the background.
Okay. George, do you want to add anything to that?
No, other than that, to the list that Dmitry mentioned, there's also Khrushchev, who then added Crimea to Ukraine in 1954. So that's just about every Soviet leader added a chunk of territory to this territory called Ukraine, which, as Dmitry said, doesn't really exist. I think the reason the Bolsheviks did this was that they wanted to diminish the role of Russia in the USSR. I mean, Lenin, in particular, had a deep animus towards Russia. He talked very disparagingly about greater Russian chauvinism, and essentially, what the Bolshevik did, especially Lenin, was to carve out bits and pieces of Russia and then assign them to various other national groupings. And so what happened when the USSR dissolved is that all of these borders, which were arbitrarily drawn up by the Bolsheviks and often didn't have any real correspondence with where nations were living and where nations had their identity, they somehow became sacrosanct, and the West took these Bolshevik created borders, administrative boundaries, and declared them to be inviolable international frontiers. So it's a kind of an irony that the anti-communist West takes a sacrosanct, arbitrarily drawn up borders created by Lenin and Stalin.
Okay, Peter?
That was brilliant from Dmitry. I learned a lot, but it's worth pointing out that nobody, including Russia, is disputing the right of Ukraine to continue its existence as an independent country. There's an argument over the borders with Russia, but I think it's the Russian position that the rest of the country can stay as it is, and it would not be a good thing for anybody, I think, to stir up the Poles to claim bits of Ukraine or to have a fight for the spoils after the military defeat or surrender of Ukraine.
Okay, always have. As I say, it's always useful to get a perspective, putting things into historical perspective. One of the controversial questions, because there's been comments on all sides, I wanted to get your take, each of your takes, on who started the current conflict. Dmitry?
It was NATO expansion. Once NATO decided that it would expand all the way up to the borders between the Ukraine or Donbass and Russia, that was basically a cause to start a war right there. Russia tolerated NATO expansion for as long as it was possible, but past that point it could not be tolerated. That was the big reason. NATO expansion has been all along basically a violation of an agreement made running up to the reunification of Germany's East and West Germany. It was agreed that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east, and that agreement was violated. Russia objected every time, but objections were ignored until there was the threat of the Ukraine being absorbed into NATO, at which point Russia had no alternative except to oppose this expansion militarily. The other problem was genocide of the Russian population in the Donbass perpetuated by Ukrainian Nazi brigades. They shelled civilian districts. Over the course of 10 years, they hurt tens of thousands of people, including women and children. And before the actual start of the special military operation on February 25th, there was troops massed right next to the largest city, Donetsk. ready to basically roll in with tanks and start slaughtering civilians. And the Russians really politically could not stand idly by and allow that slaughter to happen, and were forced to intervene and successfully saved the lives of countless people.
Okay. George?
No, I agree with Dimitri's assessment, but the story really starts in the 1990s, because the moment that the Soviet Union dissolved itself, the West saw an opportunity in Ukraine and to use Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia. This culminated in the election of 2004, which was won by Viktor Yanukovych. So there were two rounds of voting. Viktor Yanukovych clearly won. The West did their usual color revolution routine, and they had a third round. And what do you know? Viktor Yanukovych was defeated. And then this happened again in 2010. So Viktor Yanukovych, who should have been president, was then failed to become president. 2010, Viktor Yanukovych again wins an election. The second time he wins an election, and on a platform of neutrality for Ukraine, no membership of NATO for Ukraine. This is what the platform he ran on. He wins on that. The parliament changes the law and says, that's it, Ukraine will not be in NATO. And then lo and behold, he's again overthrown. Again, the same cast of character. The West moves in, yet another color revolution, and they oust Viktor Yanukovych and then go back to the application for NATO membership. Well, what then happens is that the voting bloc that had absolutely resolutely voted for Viktor Yanukovych, both in 2004 and in 2007, well, you can't just simply rob us of our sovereign democratic rights in this way. And they said, we're not going to accept this new government in Kiev because it's the product of an illegal, illegitimate coup. And the government in Kiev, a wholly illegitimate government, then decided to use force to crush the people of the Donbass, who were acting entirely in accordance with their constitutional rights. I mean, this is what would happen anywhere, in any country where there's a coup, that you don't accept the coup's government. After all, everyone celebrates Boris Yeltsin in August 1991, when he refused to accept the coup by the Communist Party, Pugo and Yanayev, and that was wonderful. There was Boris Yeltsin standing on top of a tank. Well, that's what happens. You don't accept a coup government. That's what happened in the Donbass. They refused to accept the coup government, and the coup government resorted to massive use of force against the people of the Donbass, and that's really what triggered this the confrontation, and that NATO continued with its support for this illegal regime, and particularly in doing what NATO wanted all along, which was to get them into induct them as members of this military alliance. Obviously, Russia was not going to accept this. And the path to war was inevitable.
Okay. We're going to get Peter's views after the break. But first of all, just an important message. At The Pulse, we bring you the latest live news, current affairs and stories that shape our world. Our commitment is to keep you informed with unfiltered news, expert analysis and in-depth investigative journalism that you can trust. We believe in delivering quality content without compromise, but we can't do it without you. Your support enables us to remain independent and continue our mission of providing honest, reliable journalism for everybody. Please donate today to keep the Pulse strong and help us make a difference together. There you go. Embracing that message. We're going to take a quick break. When I come back, we'll be digging a bit deeper and we're going to get Peter's reaction to what we just discussed. Don't touch that dial.
Critically analyzing global affairs. The Muckrakers.
Today's News Talk.
The Pulse.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers. Me, Andrew Eborn, joined today by Dr. George Szamuely, Dmitry Orlov, and Peter Ford. And we're looking, first of all, at the situation in Ukraine. I asked the question, because it's been all over the news, is who started this war? Peter, let me get your reaction first.
Well, the underlying cause, of course, was the United States and its hostility towards first the Soviet Union and then Russia. I mean, what we're discussing is a bit like what caused the First World War. Well, there was an approximate cause. Someone, a Serb radical, killed an eminent dignitary, but there were deeper causes, of course, and fundamentally the hostility between Britain and Germany. Similarly here, the deeper cause, and this is really to Trump's credit, that he is trying to address this deeper cause, the fundamental hostility that has existed for far too long between the United States and Russia. And this is quite revolutionary, Trump's approach, by trying to deal not just with the symptoms, that is the battle lines at the moment between Ukraine and Russia, but more fundamentally, he's gone straight for the jugular, straight for where the real problem lies, which is the mistrust between Washington and Moscow. And he's taken some really astonishing, encouraging steps towards reassuring Russia about the United States change. Really forced the entire geopolitical game into a paradigm shift. But no doubt we will go deeper into this later in the hour.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that the reason I asked the question is obviously the media burst a blood vessel when the suggestion was that Zelensky started it. What I think all three of you gentlemen are saying is that it was one of the main reasons was their desire to join NATO, and that was the reason that Russia basically used as that. So Russia started the war, but it was that was the reason, is they wanted to join NATO. The question, I guess, to each of you is: firstly, is that really on the table? We've said, and Starmer says they're on an irreversible path, rather, to NATO membership. And the second question I would ask is, does it really mean anything now with Trump and his current comments on what's going to happen with NATO and NATO maybe stopping the funding? What's your take on that, Dmitry?
Well, I don't think that it is at all likely that the Ukraine will ever be joining NATO for several reasons. First of all, a country that is at war cannot join NATO. It says so. It says so in the NATO Charter. Secondly, it is unclear in what boundaries the Ukraine would join NATO. A country has to have described boundaries, certain boundaries, within which it can be recognized as part of NATO. It is not reasonable to include the Ukraine within NATO when 5 of former Ukrainian provinces or regions are claimed by Russia as part of its territory according to its constitution. It is just not reasonable at all. And the most important reason of all is that there is a wish to conclude peace talks, peace agreements with Russia, to end hostilities over the Ukraine, move on, because there are various things that the world needs Russia for, that this military conflict is getting in the way of. And it is not possible to conclude this conflict unless NATO membership for the Ukraine is off the table.
Okay. Just as a headline, coming back to you on that, what does the world need Russia for?
Well, the United States needs to explore the resources in the Arctic Shelf, because the oil and gas reserves from shale oil, mostly in the Permian basin, that is left, are running out, and the United States needs to continue to produce hydrocarbons. The Arctic is the one place to explore, but the United States is in no position to do that without Russian assistance. Russia has the icebreakers and the expertise in that area. American forays into that area were unsuccessful. That is just one example. There are many others. The United States, and Boeing in particular, suffered quite a lot because they stopped importing titanium parts, not raw titanium, but parts made of titanium for aircraft construction. There are many other things that Russia produces that the United States needs, and war gets in the way of that. On the other hand, the Ukraine does not produce anything at all, not even grain at this point. The harvest is pretty much a wash because of various economic issues, and the world does not need the Ukraine for anything at all. And it's just that business-like attitude that Trump has. What good are the Ukrainians? What are they good for? They're good for absolutely nothing. What are the Russians good for? Lots of things.
Okay, well, we're going to be looking at what Ukraine might be able to do and the value of any mineral deals. First of all, we do have to take a quick break for the news headlines. You're watching The Pulse today. Do not touch that dial.
Critically analyzing global affairs. The Muckrakers. Today's news talk. The Pulse.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, joined by Dr. George Szamuely, Dmitry Orlov and Peter Ford. And we were discussing about NATO membership and whether Ukraine will ever be a member. George?
Well, it's very hard to make any of these very declaratory statements. Trump isn't going to be around forever. In fact, one could say he's a lame duck president. Within about 18 months, we're going to have the midterms. And almost immediately after the midterms, the 2028 presidential campaign begins, and the focus will be off Trump. It'll be on someone else. Even in the United States, there's by no means a consensus on the question of Ukraine and NATO. With just, not just there's no consensus even within Trump's own party. The Senate Republicans are by no means on board with Trump's peace initiative on Ukraine, Trump's attempt to improve relations with Russia, absolute hostility from the Democrats, all of the Democrats, and by and large, a great deal of hostility among Republicans, particularly among the Senate Republicans, but even among House Republicans. So yeah, there are the MAGA, America First Republicans who do support Trump's policy. So there's a great deal of division there. Plus, you've got the Europeans. The Europeans are absolutely determined, absolutely hell-bent determined on keeping this war going. And they are now running quite a sophisticated, clever campaign of trying to push Trump into continuing with this war. We saw this with Macron in his visit, when he started talking about, we're going to bring in peacekeepers. Now, he doesn't really mean peacekeepers. He means essentially introducing NATO forces into Ukraine, but he was cunning enough to use the term peacekeepers, which Trump seemed to accept. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, the Russians agree, the peacekeepers, even though the Russians said, we're not going to accept European forces in Ukraine, whether they're under the NATO banner or not under the NATO banner. We're not going to accept them for the obvious reason, because they're not peacekeepers, they are belligerents. They're not in any way objective, disinterested observers. They are allies of Ukraine's. And Macron knows this, and Starmer knows this, Friedrich Merz knows this, that's why they're trying to introduce them. But they also know that it cannot be done without the help of the United States. And therefore, that's what they're trying to do, trying to push Trump into doing this. And similarly, this whole minerals deal, which I guess we'll talk about, I mean, the issue isn't whether it's minerals or hydrocarbons or infrastructural ports, and all the rest of it that is in that agreement. The issue is to get America involved in Ukraine, to forge this alliance between Trump and Zelensky, so that Trump identifies Ukraine with American interests. That's the goal here. I don't know if they're going to succeed, but that's clearly what they are trying to do. As for membership of NATO, that can be postponed into the indefinite future, or into after Trump is gone.
Kicked into the long grass. Okay, Peter, what's your take on NATO membership for Ukraine?
People are not listening to Trump. He means what he says. He's made it clear Ukraine will never be a member of NATO. And this is the pattern ever since Trump took power. People don't believe him, but he's not hiding anything. He has stated through his defense secretary with absolute clarity that Ukraine will not become a member of NATO. So the Europeans, Starmer, can bluster all they like. It is not going to happen, nor is there going to be what Starmer calls a US backstop, which would be equivalent to NATO membership for Ukraine. Indeed, it could even be worse more, because Article 5 of the NATO Charter is not automatic. But it's not going to happen. It's a false debate, and people like Starmer are just in total denial. But it serves a political purpose for the moment for him to carry on saying that. But turning to Trump's strategy, George rightly pointed out that a lot of people in the States, including in Trump's own party, are not happy about his foreign policy. And I think this is why he's gone along with this hoax about Ukrainian minerals. I mean, serious experts have written articles pointing out that Ukraine doesn't actually have $500 billion worth of valuable minerals. Its current exports are about minerals are about $20 million a year. It's a mythical El Dorado, but it serves a purpose for Trump. It helps him to sell what he's doing to the Republicans.
And I do want to do a deep dive into that, because the Telegraph had an article saying exactly what you were saying. Looking at the figure from the World Bank, the latest figure for recovery and rebuild after 3 years of war is 524 billion. Obviously, that's going up all of the time. Zelensky says there's a draft deal with the US on resources as a framework whose success depends on Donald Trump, as it emerged that the text stops well short of providing Kyiv with explicit security guarantees. In terms of the minerals, I do want to look at this sort of side, because if it's all pie in the sky and it's just a fire sale under pressure, what's realistically going to happen, Dimitri?
Well, first of all, those resources are not actually resources. They are a map of resources drawn up by Soviet geological survey teams. They were sent out to find rare earths and this and that. And sure, they found trace amounts of them in various places and marked those places on the map. How much is actually there? Well, that depends on how much is actually recoverable using known technology in a way that would be profitable. And the answer to that could be zero, because look at for instance, look at lithium. First of all, that lithium is on territory now controlled by Russia and claimed as Russia as its sovereign territory. So how exactly is Zelensky going to negotiate over that? Secondly, that lithium is in the form of granite. So what you have to do is blast away at the granite, then grind it into a powder, and then use a chemical process to get the lithium out of that powder. And it's parts per million, maybe 1, maybe 2 parts per million lithium, and the rest is granite. How economic is that when you can just go to Bolivia and and get the same material out of clay that can be moved using an excavator. No blasting required. No grinding. So it's all rather ephemeral. It's just old Soviet maps that somebody chose to interpret in the most optimistic way possible. Now, supposing that there was any chance of a deal over that, which I doubt there actually is, who would sign that deal on the Ukrainian side? Zelensky, whose term expired last May, or the Speaker of the Parliament, given that the Parliament's term had expired in August. And of course you could have elections, and then there would be a democratically elected new leader who could sign it, but that would require lifting the state of emergency. But who would lift the state of emergency if there's no legitimate president? You see that the entire political system in the Ukraine has maneuvered itself into a cul-de-sac where nobody there has any legitimacy to sign any agreement over anything. So it's a completely phantom piece of paper, and I think Trump is doing this in order to simulate activity. That's all he's trying to do.
Okay, a fascinating insight. We're going to get George's view straight after these messages. Don't touch that dial.
From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers. Today's news talk, The Pulse.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. I'm also joined by Dr. George Szamuely, Peter Ford, and Dmitry Orlov. And we're looking at this supposed deal about minerals and other payback mechanisms for the US. And given that Russia's seized half of Ukraine's rare earth deposits, George, do they have enough left to pay back the USA? Or do you also think that the deal is a complete fantasy?
Well, the deal isn't specifically about the rare earths. The deal involves all extractable materials in Ukraine from the drafts that we have seen. So that involves hydrocarbons, it involves fuels, it involves ports, infrastructure. So it's not, we shouldn't get stuck, too hung up on this rare earth business. It's, the people on the American side are not fools. They don't just sign, away something. Scott Besson, the guy's a billionaire. I mean, he's not going to sign anything that's so plainly idiotic. The other thing is about the legitimacy. No one in the West, no one in the United States gives a damn about legitimacy. Remember during the 1990s when they signed the Dayton Accords that ended the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the man who signed on the behalf of Bosnia and Herzegovina was Alija Izetbegovic. His term in office had expired 3 years earlier. And the Serbs rightly complained and said, well, look, he was only supposed to serve 1 year in that office, and he just went on, just, unilaterally extending his term in office. And the West accepted him. He was a beloved figure in the West, and he signed the Dayton Accords on behalf of Bosnia and Herzegovina, even though he wasn't president of Bosnia and Herzegovina. He was because he was president of the presidency, and he was supposed to have stepped aside 3 years earlier. So the West doesn't care about these things, the legitimacy and whatever. They just want to get the deal done. The problem is that Zelensky is, marching with the Europeans. The Europeans and he are in lockstep. They want to keep the war going, and they are absolutely determined to find all sorts of ways in which they can keep the war going. If they are determined to keep the war going, then the only way it can stop is if Trump cracks down on the Europeans. In other words, it's not just go along and hem and haw when Macron shows up and when Starmer shows up. He has to apply serious pressure against the Europeans to bring this fighting to an end. Otherwise, the war just goes on. If they just go their own way, because they are determined to continue. All the noises that are coming from Europe, including even on election night, from Friedrich Merz, the new German chancellor, is they are determined to keep the war going. And unless Trump applies serious pressure, then the war will just go on.
And I think it's interesting about Trump, the man. I made this point beforehand. I think his real mission is try and get the Nobel Peace Prize. He's trying to do that in all sorts of interesting ways. But I want to come back to a tweet or a message on X that Andrew Neil, the legendary broadcaster, writer, editor of some of the major institutions over here, he says around 200 billion euro of Russian sovereign assets are immobilized after Moscow launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago, are being held by the EU in a Brussels-based financial institution called Euroclear. They are earning interest. The US holds the equivalent of only $5 billion, he says. The EU should designate half of the 200 billion euro to Ukraine for post-war reconstruction and use the remainder to rebuild Europe's armed forces. What's your view on that, Dimitri?
I don't think that it's going to happen because it's private property, sovereign private property, and using it for anything other than keeping it keeping it safe or returning it to its rightful owner would be considered as theft. And I don't think anybody really wants to be on the record as, Euroclear in particular doesn't want to appear as a bunch of thieves, because that would be the end of Euroclear. From that point on, no sane person would trust Euroclear with their funds. So for that reason, it wouldn't happen. But I would like to go back to the previous point of, who wants war, who doesn't want war. Well, I think that Trump definitely doesn't want war because he wants to disown the Ukraine. He wants to make it so that the Ukraine is Biden's problem and the Europeans' problem, and then when it goes really badly, which it's doing already, it won't be blamed on him. And that's why he wants to resolve the entire problem as quickly as possible. The Europeans, they want to continue the war because they will lose face if the whole thing goes in favor of Russia. And they think that they want to postpone the inevitable, I think. But another country that doesn't really want to end the war precipitously, let us say, is Russia. Russia doesn't want peace. Russia wants victory. Russia wants to demilitarize and denazify the Ukraine. And since the West is standing behind the Ukraine, Russia wants to demilitarize and denazify the West. And that is its task. And that is going to take a long time. Now, it already has 5 Ukrainian regions, but Russian troops are also in Kharkiv and Sumy regions. And, oh, by the way, Nikolaev and Odessa are Russian land. And why would Russia just basically pass that by? And, of course, if it got Nikolaev and Odessa, the rest of the Ukraine would become a landlocked country. And Russia would have access to Transnistria, which is all basically Russian, and wants to join the Russian Federation, and parts of Moldavia, which are basically Russian and want to join the Russian Federation. So Russia will not leave that job unfinished, I think, and that is going to take time. Now, the way the war is going is the casualties on the Ukrainian side are 10, maybe 20, maybe 50 times greater than on the Russian side. The Russians are doing this very, very carefully and meticulously, and they have all the weapons they need, all the artillery shells they need to get the job done. And what the Russians want their leaders to do is let them finish the job. And I don't think that the peace plan, the precipitous peace plan that Trump has in mind takes that into account.
Okay. Peter, do you have think there's any merit in Andrew Neil's suggestion, or do you share Dimitri's view that it's just simply would be theft?
It wouldn't just be theft, but it would lead to the collapse of many European banks. It could have been done, this ploy, at any point in the last 3 years. That it's not being done tells us that there are some serious grown-ups who don't listen to the likes of Andrew Neil, and I'm sure many eminent bankers have been warning European leaders of that. But that this idea could keep coming back is quite quite scary. One wonders what China thinks of it, given that it's Chinese money, which is propping up the US economy. But slightly changing tack, I think Dimitri is probably right that this could end up with the war simply grinding on because the Europeans will not abandon Ukraine, but America will. And there's something that we don't really know. How important is US intelligence for the Ukrainian war effort? This could actually be absolutely crucial, but we're in ignorance about that. But I think Trump's actions are consistent with a plan B on his part, just to wash his hands, to say, well, I've done my best, Europe, you've got the tar baby now. You know, we may have created the tar baby, but it's yours now. I've got other things to be getting on with. So his actions are consistent with that. But I come back to the point that all politics are domestic politics. Trump looks at this through the prism of US domestic politics, and particularly what George was describing, the fact that if the Democrats were doing what he's doing, cooling the hot war with Russia, they'd be accused of being traitors. But Trump is getting away with it because he's throwing sand in people's eyes with this minerals deal, and with his coercing Europe into spending more on not on the Ukraine conflict specifically, but on their defense spending. I mean, this UK increase in spending, which has just been announced, will not make a ha'porth of difference to the Ukraine situation in the foreseeable future. But it allows Trump to go to Congress and the conservative right and say, look, I'm bringing results. We can leave old Europe to its own devices, and I've avoided nuclear war with Russia, and we've saved a lot of money.
Yes, no, some interesting points there. I want, George, I want to come to you about a couple of comments about the awkward, I guess is one word you could describe it, press conference which Emmanuel Macron had with Donald Trump, where he rebuffed Trump's claims about European aid to Ukraine, asserting Europe's significant contributions as both leaders declared their intent to be players for peace on the third anniversary of Putin's invasion. And this also coincided with Keir Starmer's announcement of 4.5 billion in additional UK aid for Ukraine. You said, George, on your X posting on the 24th of February, that Macron lied through the news conference in suggesting that it was Russia that had violated the Minsk Accords. Who exactly was responsible then for the 13,000 deaths in the Donbass during the Minsk years? Macron kept repeating security guarantees for Ukraine. What is he on about? France is ready to go to war on Ukraine's behalf against Russia, ? So why hasn't France already done so? Macron is talking total drivel. George.
Well, that's right. And of course, he was lying, because that's what he was trying to persuade Trump of. You know, he was counting that Trump maybe is not that well informed about what happened in Ukraine. So he was saying, well, the reason why we have this war is that there were no security guarantees attached to Minsk. And so that's why the Russians went ahead and invaded Ukraine. If only there were security guarantees provided to Ukraine, Russia wouldn't have done it. That's why he kept repeating this issue of the security guarantees. And then he turned around and said, what, peacekeepers? So he uses peacekeepers, security guarantors, interchangeably just to confuse issues. And of course, it's a way of getting Trump into Ukraine. It's a way of getting, well, say, hey, we need security guarantees, otherwise Russia's going to do this again. And it's a way of pushing the Americans in. And of course, It's absolutely right, because if you're going to talk about security guarantees, what does that mean? What does a security guarantee mean? Security guarantees means you are ready to go to war on another country's behalf. Now, in those circumstances, there's no way Russia could accept something like that, because that means all it would require is for Ukraine to provoke some incident, provoke an attack from Russia, and then, of course, France and the UK and the Americans or whoever else is there can say, well, we're under attack. Russia has violated the agreement. We are the security guarantors, and therefore, we are affected with that war with Russia. That's why it's such a dishonest and manipulative act. And the same Starmer, who's coming on Thursday, he's going to play the same card, which is, hey, we need security guarantees, otherwise we can't possibly trust Russia to keep to this bargain. But it's a total lie, because they won't be security guarantors. They will be a tripwire in order to start a war with Russia. And some of these people are absolutely insane and seem to want a war with Russia. It's hard to believe it, but you just look through the British media in particular. I mean, they seem to be regularly calling for war with Russia. I don't know what they're smoking, but that really seems to be a powerful movement within Europe to want this war with Russia. It's insane, but I think that's where Europeans are now.
Okay. A couple of minutes left today. I just want to touch briefly on Gaza, and particularly, as I don't know if you've seen this AI-generated video that Trump has shared of Trump Gaza, which has a golden statue of Trump, a hummus eating Elon Musk, and a shirtless American Israeli leaders lounging on the beach. It's got a voiceover to a dance beat saying, "No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is finally here." Dimitri, did you see this video?
Yes, I believe I did.
What are your views?
Rather poor taste. It's in rather poor taste, I would say. Trump is not known for his taste. There were certain other cartoons and caricatures drawn of Trump residing on a giant pile of corpses and skeletons and skulls, which is more descriptive of what he's talking about. The carnage in Gaza over the past year has been absolutely horrendous. And to talk about building a Trump hotel casino resort on that land is just in unspeakably poor taste.
Okay, Peter?
Trump is sending a message to the Israelis. This is the carrot for the donkey. This is to keep them moving forward on implementation of the Trump-inspired agreement for their evacuation of Gaza. And again, you have to remember the domestic politics of this. If it was the Democrats who managed to winkle the Israelis out of Gaza and arrange the exchange of hostages, they'd be accused of throwing Israel under the bus. But Donald gets away with it because he's created this mirage, this picture of Gaza Riviera, which neutralizes the Israeli far right and therefore the American conservatives. I love it. I think it's very devious and very clever. And look at the timing. It comes just as the negotiators, Hamas and Israel, are getting down to discussing the second phase. It's got to be
okay. Very quick then. Final word for you, George. 10 seconds. What's your view on the Trump video?
The Trump video, I tend to think this is appalling taste. I think, to be honest, I think the Trump plan for Gaza is crazy, and I think it's letting down his America First message, because when you do this, then you have to say, well, where's the America First? I mean, identifying yourself with the most extreme elements in Israel, there's nothing America First about it.
We will come back to this topic. Dmitry Orlov, Peter Ford, George Szamuely, thank you very much for joining me. Do join me again on Friday. I'll be back with you at 5 o'clock. But for the rest of you, thanks for joining us. I'll see you next time here on The Muckrakers.
To hear a replay of this hour, go to episodes at thepulse.today. This is Today's News Talk.